Esther and I are going to be talking about our lovely city, Montreal. Esther, thank you for being here today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Esther is kind of a local Montreal celebrity, and she's been able to grow quite a following on Instagram. You should check her out. Esther, do you want to talk to us about your background and how you built such a following and how you became a person of influence in Montreal?
Absolutely, my pleasure. So, I had been an entrepreneur for about 12 years, and during that time period, I had a bit of an interest in voiceover work, which I started to take some courses on. And COVID happened. I put my business aside and I focused on my voiceover work, and I took a bit of acting as well online and a little bit before the pandemic as well. And I always had an interest in social media. With the business that I had, I did use social media as a means to sell. Was selling fashion accessories, so I built my brand a bit using social media. So I had a knowledge of it. I took some master classes, etc. And because I was also getting into the acting world, I noticed that there was definite ageism happening. And so it bothered me. And one day on TikTok, because I started to go down the rabbit hole, so to speak, on TikTok, and I decided to put out a video using a aging thing. And
You're talking about an aging filter?
yes, thank you. So I used an aging filter and basically said that I'm 64 years old. People expect me to look like this. Instead, I look like
You know,
this.
we don't allow lies on camera.
All right.
64? Are you sure about
I,
that?
I was. I'm now 67. So
Oh
basically,
wow.
yes, filter. It was a filter, and it was actually from Snapchat, believe it or not. And I had guests over. This was around 2021. We were allowed to have people in our backyard. I had some guests over. I uploaded the video, put my phone down, and didn't think much of it. I heard ding, ding, ding. My phone was kind of blowing up. I didn't understand what was going on. Picked up my phone and I looked, and I had over 300,000 views. I had only had 72 followers on TikTok, so that was kind of incredible.
Wow, what
What
on
I
earth did
did,
you say to get 300,000 views?
exactly what I told you. I used an aging filter and said, "This, I'm 64 years old. People expect me to look like this." And then I removed the filter and said, "In fact, I look like this." And that was, for some reason, caught on, and I just went viral. When I saw that happening, I decided that I was going to do something with it. I went on this other app called Clubhouse, which was very popular at the time. They had many different rooms, and there was one room that was all about TikTok, how to grow your TikTok. I started attending this room. At the time, it was available daily, then it would go to weekly rooms, and basically absorbed as much information as I could about how to grow on TikTok. There were a lot of big TikTokers in that room, and I just followed what they said to do. I literally posted every day for 2 years. I did the same. I took the same reels or videos and I put them on Instagram. And basically, in about a year and a half, I grew to 100,000 followers on each platform, literally on the same week. In the same week, I hit 100,000. So it's not that it's just, oh, it's just, from Meta or it's just TikTok. It actually worked on both platforms, which are actually quite different. So I knew that there was something.
That must be a record. And
It,
doing
it
both simultaneously and getting
yes.
that many followers in a 1 week's time.
Well, it was over a period of time, but I hit 100,000 followers in the same week on both platforms. So
Wow,
that
that's quite an
was, yeah,
accomplishment.
thank you. It was quite astounding. And the funny thing is that most people's idea of TikTok, for instance, is that it's a bunch of teenagers dancing. And, and Instagram is, more focused for like millennials. TikTok is more Gen Z. And here I am, baby boomer and finding success on both. So, there's again, it's about stereotypes. This is how I felt about age. It's stereotypes. So I, you know,
Do you think the
I
younger followers that you have are attracted to the confidence that you have and the assurance that you've given yourself to say, hey, regardless of how old I am or how young I am, I'm entitled to be part of the scene, and I'm entitled to, to be a contributor and influencer, and that's what you've managed to do.
I have been told by a few that they want to be me when they grow up. So I think or I wish that my mom or I wish that my dad was more like you. There are a few comments like that that I do get.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's part of it. I think that, maybe it gives them hope that, life that isn't over after 40 or after 50, that, there's so much more ahead of you. And this is just, the first, I always think of my life in thirds. So that I'm in the last third of my life, and it's, as productive as my second third and even the first third. There's just so much left, and there's so much that you can accomplish regardless of your chronological age. So that was,
Well, may
and
it be the sweetest slice of pie that you have yet.
uh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah. So I also on Facebook, I have about 51,000 followers, and even on Threads, I have 22,000. So it's not just on one platform. It went on many platforms. So there's something to be said about that, especially those people who feel that they're too old to get on social media or to be involved or become a content creator. Age has nothing to do with it.
Esther, you grew up in Montreal, and you've
Yeah.
seen the decades, right? You've seen part of the 60s, although you were very young in the 60s. You've seen the 70s, you've seen the 80s, and so on and so forth. What would you say, or how would you describe the transformation from particularly the late 60s to today, with everything that we know Montreal has gone through, particularly the flight of, Anglophones to Toronto and other places in the world? What's your take on the transformation from a societal standpoint?
I definitely, the first thing I was going to say about the exodus of the Anglophones out of Montreal into Ontario, out west in the States, etc., that really occurred, I would say, late 70s, early 80s. And, that exodus actually affected many different areas, especially business. I think Montreal was the epicenter for many years for business, and that changed. A lot of it went to Toronto. There was just this feeling of the city that was so vibrant, that was so full of life, that was sort of like, the New York of Canada, or, the Paris of Europe, that it was slowly going away, that it was this feeling of that the city was dying in some ways. So it was kind of a dark time, as opposed to the 60s and mid 70s. There was definitely a huge change. And like even in nightlife, there was a definite decline in the clubbing and just the amount of people that were in the city. I think tourism was probably still about the same. People were always fascinated with Montreal because it was like, the Paris of Canada. But there was, as a newly graduated student from McGill, I, uh, I definitely felt it in 1980 that I had this pressure to leave Montreal. I remember going for jobs, and I was not fluently bilingual because when I grew up, they did not push French. It was like, well, yeah, you take a half an hour a day to learn French. And then by the time I was in grade seven, because we had grade seven back then, certain kids were able to go to French immersion. So the French immersion did not exist. Anglophones going to French school did not exist, and our capability to speak the language is not nearly as good as it is with the kids today who come out of school. So there was this the sort of this barrier. This language became an issue. I remember taking extra French classes several times to improve my French, and it was always difficult. I was not fluent enough. So there was this pressure to leave the city. And most of my friends did, my members of my family did. And so it was a kind of isolating and difficult time. It felt almost uncomfortable to be an Anglophone.
You know what's interesting? And thank you for sharing that. I find that Anglophones and Francophones today have a greater understanding, particularly the younger generations, right? Millennials and Gen Z,
Right.
thanks to the internet and thanks to social media. And so, Francophones, you can find them using English words on social media to express themselves and also build links and common understanding with the Anglophone community and to connect with a world that is largely dominated by English. And so that's something that's really cool. And of course, we want to protect the French language, and we want to make sure
Absolutely.
that Quebec, remains, distinct, and that the French language is the first language. We want to also make sure that we are aware of the world that surrounds us, and it's a world that's dominated by English, and that doesn't just communicate in English for business, but that has fun in English. All over the world, people listen to American music, American movies,
Hmm.
and it's got the American empire is not merely its military. It's it's the people and their expression and their creativity and everything that America communicates to the world. From Hollywood to pop culture and music, and it's a very powerful story. The story of America.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Canadians, we very much followed in, the U.S. Footsteps and in the type of you're talking about entertainment, the shows that we watch, the music that we listen to. The majority did come from the USA. So yeah, definitely it had a major influence, and it's a huge difference now that there is social media and that we sort of have the world at our fingertips, literally. So yeah, it's different. I did not have that growing up. And maybe had, that existed in my time, I wouldn't have felt that isolation that I just spoke about. Being sort of, an Anglophone in a French dominated society. And at that time it was, the exodus that we spoke about. So yeah, there is definitely a lot to be said about that. But yeah, it is true. The world, US has dominated uh, business, entertainment, etc. So, yeah, English is still a very important language, and I'm glad that is seen now from Gen Z and millennials now that they have a different outlook on the different languages.
Esther, talk to us about the amount of fun that you had in the 70s and 80s. Do you think the generation today, millennials and Gen Z, would they be jealous of the amount of fun that people had back then? What was the nightlife like? What was clubbing like? Was it a lot more exciting before the advent of cell phones and social media? Did people party different? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, it was not recorded in any way, shape, or form, so nobody knew what you were up to. As today, you know exactly where so and so went and who they were with. So there was that sort of freedom, so to speak. It was an exciting time. Um, there was a club called the Limelight this was before Studio 54. Came out, I think, 1973. They opened and they were like, one of the biggest clubs until about 1980. And that's where a lot of us, young people would go to party. And it was very different. This was the first time that you would go to a club that had a DJ that would mix music the way that they did. It was very different. The dance floor was huge. There was, I think, a capacity of over 1,200 people. There were two floors,
Wow.
and the top floor was much more exclusive. And so the aim was to be led into the top floor. Um, uh,
Did the
there
dance
was,
floor light up like in
oh,
Studio
yes,
54? All sorts of
very
different
much so.
colors?
Very much so. And sometimes it would be red for the whole night, or sometimes blue for the whole night. It was very different. And it was also the first time that people who were queer, gay, etc., were open about their sexuality. And, this was the first time as a young adult that I saw, um, you know, uh, men in makeup and just wearing clothing that just totally expressed who they really were. And this was sort of unheard of before. So it was extremely eclectic. The dance floor was almost like a show in itself, and it was just the place to be. And it was different as well as that it was open till 6 a.m. And there were no other clubs in the city that were open to 6 a.m. So they would close at 3. They'd let you out for like 20 minutes, and then you'd come back in. They weren't allowed to serve liquor because they weren't legally after 3 a.m. But
Why
the
did they
dance
shut down in the middle of
I think they
between
had to
3 and 6?
remove I think they had to remove the alcohol from the rooms and just put it in the back, and it became alcohol free, and then the music would continue, and there were people who worked at other clubs who would come to this club as well to party because they would finish at 3, and by 3:30 they were out and done and looking to continue to party. So this is what
Of, of
Limelight was
course, by
known for.
3 a.m., everybody's already drunk, anyways, right?
Well, of course, exactly. So, and of course there were other illicit, things going on as well. And there was a floor, one of the floors had beds. And I think I was only there once or twice. I usually prefer to go to the dance floor. There was all kinds of things going on, and people were just free, and they were just out to have fun and a good time. And it was so different. And we just it was about dancing. It wasn't even about meeting people. I don't even recall that was the purpose. I don't even think I would meet anyone per se. It was just about going with a bunch of friends and dancing the night away, and there was no pressure. There was none of that, oh, I hope
Well,
I meet
Esther,
someone.
they're talking about the death of nightclubs today.
Oh, are
I
they?
think in the
Okay.
UK, for example, there was 1,500 nightclubs before COVID. After COVID, 600 nightclubs. I forgot if it was in London only or all of the UK. And apparently, one of the major reasons for the death of nightclubs is that people could meet each other online.
There you
So a
go.
lot of people don't want to go to nightclubs and spend the money and buy drinks if they can just meet online. Do you think that's one of the sad aspects of social media and dating apps and dating culture today?
I do. I don't think it's the same. I don't think you can get the same feel for a person chatting or looking at a photo and chatting, or even, FaceTiming or whatever, tools that they have on the dating apps where you can view someone. It's not the same. You have to, in my impression and my feeling about it is that there's nothing like meeting someone in person. You can feel their vibe. You can see, even their body language, everything. It just makes such a difference. And sometimes there's, an attraction in person that you would never feel, chatting or even, FaceTiming or, just viewing someone on live video. It,
Tell
it's,
me
it's,
about it.
yeah, it's a huge difference. You can't even compare. And like I said, when we used to go, we didn't even think about that. We were just there to dance and have fun. And if it happened, it happened. And if it didn't, it didn't. There wasn't that same kind of pressure, like, oh, I'm going to go to a club and I got to meet someone. We just didn't think that way. I mean, there were clubs like that, but that was not the trend. The trend was these
So
large discos. Yeah.
John Travolta and Saturday Night Live, when he was going out, do you think he was just trying to show his moves, or was he actually looking to pick up some ladies?
You're talking about Saturday Night Fever. Yeah. So
Saturday Night Fever, yes.
I think it was probably to show his moves more than anything. And I think that the women just came because he was, he was a great dancer and a nice looking guy. And I think that just sort of was sort of like an offshoot of that. My feeling of that character was that he was very into the dancing, and he was sort of like the king of the dance floor. And that if he, met a woman, that's great. If he didn't, I don't think he cared. That's my feeling. And that was the feeling of disco and going to clubs. The feeling in the 70s and early 80s, it wasn't so much about going to hook up or meet someone or anything like that. It was really about dancing and having fun. And the music was incredible. And it just kept you going. I mean, dance music today is interesting. I like some of it, but it doesn't compare, in my opinion, to what disco was in the early years.
You're going to upset a lot of our young viewers, Esther.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. It's just my opinion. And I'm very aware of dance music today as well. So I do see the difference. I mean, it's great. But the beat sort of, it's rhythmic and it's a little monotonous, whereas disco sort of, were actual songs that were danceable. And it was the first time that DJs were blending music together. We hadn't seen that before. So it was very exciting.
To this day, particularly in New York, they have nightclubs where they just play disco music from the 70s and
Really?
80s. Isn't
God, I
that
have to
cool?
go. It's
And they
so
have a
cool.
disco ball, they've got a strobe light. In certain clubs, they even have, the colorful dance floor that lights up to this
Right.
day.
I think that's amazing. It
I
was
think
so
that's
much
really
fun.
cool. And everybody there, most of the people there are actually weren't even born at the time of disco, and born much later. So that's
Yeah.
kind of cool that they're nostalgic about an era that they did not live in.
Yeah, that's more common than you think. Yeah, and it was a great era. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and we had a lot of fun.